Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video I want to talk about item availability in shops and why the current system doesn't work and how it can be improved. As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and the Armory. The Armory just had some exciting updates in preparation for 3.24, so go check it out. So I'm sure most of you were in this situation. You spawn into the game after a new patch and you want to buy some gear. You have a specific set of armor in mind. You go to the store but it's not there, or maybe only one piece is available. You have two options. You settle for whatever complete set of armor you can get, or you go looking for where to buy what you actually want in-game or with an external tool. Sometimes the first option is all you need, but other times you have to obtain a specific set of armor and gear because you need it or because your org requires it. The same thing is true about ship components. This situation gave rise to tools such as the item finder or my own tool, the Armory. But we have to ask ourselves why this is the way it is. One way to look at it is that CIG are trying to use item scarcity to balance the game by restricting access to some items. They do this by spreading items around the verse, forcing you to travel to get what you need, or by making items impossible to buy and only make them lootable from enemies or lootable containers. The other way to look at it is that gearing up for doing anything in the verse is designed to be a time sink. Now, having to find and equip the correct equipment for what you want to do is not bad. It is actually an integral part of Star Citizen's design, but when you start spending a significant portion of your game time or have to dedicate extra time just for preparation, it starts becoming its own very boring gameplay loop. You can see the problems this creates. Now, restricting access to certain items is actually a core feature of most MMOs. This is the whole concept of rare and epic loot with better stats. And CIG would actually like to introduce similar mechanics to Star Citizen. The idea is to allow players to find or gain through reputation rare and powerful weapons, armor components, or even ships. And in principle, this is actually a pretty good idea. The problem is with obtaining common gear. Imagine you want to obtain an armor set, but its parts are available in two planetary locations. Assuming it takes you 10 minutes to travel between the locations and then 10 minutes each to take a tram and buy the items you want, you just spend 30 minutes just getting stuff you need. And this adds up with each location you need to visit. This is not ideal, especially with common armors and weapons which should probably be available pretty much everywhere. This doesn't make sense in the context of Stanton either. Stanton is a major manufacturing hub with 4 companies having their core facilities there, so it would make sense that you should be able to buy pretty much any kind of commonly available item in the Stanton system, especially considering that even today in real life we are able to get almost anything delivered right to our door. But that would actually lead us to a possible lore explanation to why items are not always available everywhere. The reason we're able to do this in real life is a massive logistics apparatus supporting a somewhat consumerism-focused society. It's actually pretty reasonable to think that this wouldn't translate into an interstellar society. Even with the faster-than-light travel technology available in Star Citizen, it would be difficult to build a logistics network spanning hundreds of star systems and planets. One of the core pillars of modern logistics is near real-time communication, which is not available when talking about interstellar travel. It could take hours or even days for item orders and shipping requests to reach their destinations. This would likely cause shortages of certain items, which in turn would incentivize local production of the most necessary goods and a general mindset of making do with less, especially in less developed systems. The other reason for logistics being difficult is that moving things from planet to planet requires space travel, which even in the future Star Citizen envisions is difficult, expensive, and dangerous. So having to move goods from the place they were manufactured would increase their price depending on the distance. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, it might not be possible to get all kinds of goods everywhere. But fortunately, there is a solution to that. CIG have talked about fabricators and how given the correct blueprint they can build pretty much anything from tools, weapons, armor, ship components, and even ships. All you need is the correct size of fabricator, the blueprint, and the necessary resources. The drawback is that this is relatively slow and less efficient. And that actually defines the two ways companies can manufacture goods. You can either have a production line that's fast and efficient, which allows you to create many units of one specific type of item, which in turn allows you to apply economies of scale to drive down the price. This would be your factory world like Hurston or Arcorp, where goods are made on a massive scale and should be available for a reasonable price. On the other hand, in places where it's not possible or too costly to set up a factory, people can use fabricators to make what they need for an increased cost. I think it would be reasonable for companies to sell licenses to fabricate goods in shops in distant areas for a share of the profit instead of setting up a supply chain. And that finally leads us to how item availability should work. Imagine you're at a factory world like Arcorp. Most manufacturers of common goods are likely to have a factory set up there. So most items will be available for purchase for a very low price because the point of sale is very close to the point of manufacture. This of course assumes that Arcorp, being a fully developed planet, has some kind of a mass cargo transit system on the surface, something like a train. The exception to this would be rare and exotic goods that need to be delivered, which they likely would because Arcorp or any more developed planet probably has a large enough economy to support the logistics cost, which would in turn raise the end price of these items. The other exception would be goods from manufacturers that don't have facilities on the planet. But again, if the planetary economy is large enough, there would be an incentive to get the items there to be sold at an increased price. Now, let's take a look at a remote planet that's still a part of the UEE. The local economy is relatively small and likely more focused on a certain profession, likely some variation of extraction combined with protection. This also defines the demand for items in that local economy. Manufacturers of goods primarily want to sell what they made with some profit and with the least amount of risk. The risk here being the goods being lost in transit, which leads to a loss of profit and repaying the material cost, and the risk of penalties for not filling the order. And they might not be willing to take on that risk even for an increased price, especially to supply systems with a lower demand. But they might be willing to sell their goods to an intermediate supplier, which will buy goods in bulk to distribute. The intermediate supplier then takes on the risk of supplying these smaller, distant economies. To mitigate their risk, they can use longer, safer delivery routes or insurance, which increases their delivery costs, driving up the price for the store, which defines the price for the end customer. Despite this, some goods might not get delivered at all because the demand is too low to justify the cost. Here is where fabricators come in. Some manufacturers might be willing to license blueprints for their goods to be made with local fabricators. The exact licensing model is not relevant. What's important to us is that the cost of this license is added to the end price as well as the increased cost of materials and time it takes to manufacture. So technically there should be a pretty wide variety of items available for purchase, but the items that need to be fabricated on site will have a significantly higher price and a much lower supply available. Because you have to keep in mind that the available stock of items will eventually be relevant. And finally, let's take a look at a lawless system like Pyro. It's reasonable to think that there are no official manufacturer supply chains leading to Pyro. So where do items for sale in Pyro come from? Well, the groups that control Pyro have some interest in being well armed and supplied. They also control the flow of goods into the areas they control as a source of profit. So I think they would have some kind of a semi-legitimate supplier set up to bring in official goods for a very high price. Smugglers and other traders bringing in goods on their own also fall into that category. But as we have seen with the recently revealed pyro weapons, some items can be simply made from local resources, which would provide a low-cost alternative to smuggled goods. Then we also have the ability to fabricate certain items, but I think blueprints would be a bit more rare, as licensed blueprints would probably be very difficult to obtain for a shop in Pyro. And these three would essentially form the core of available goods, which would be more or less always available for purchase. But then we also have more seasonal goods, which would depend on the current crime activity, meaning goods stolen on raids into other systems or from other factions or players. This would form an irregular supply of random goods for a varied price depending on how difficult they were to obtain. And that actually brings us to the very interesting topic of economy in lawless systems, but that's a topic for another video that I would like to cover once Pyro is out. And with that being said, that's all for today. What do you think? Should items be more widely available but for a more diverse price? How will player-owned fabricators impact the economy? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.